Inclusive leaders recognize their power. I'm finding increasingly as I go around organizations that there are a lot of high-level leaders who love to be a man, usually, this is the world we live in sadly, hopefully not for much longer, or woman of the people. But they walk around and they pretend, I'm just the same as everybody else. Except for my salary and benefits package and the fact that everyone, I've walked in places with people who are men and women of the people, and you're with them in the corridors, and you can see people pressing themselves against the wall, as if there's a kind of force field around them that pushes people out of deference or fear out of the way. But these people will insist to me, I'm just like everyone. And it is the way to use faux humility to reap all the benefits of status without any of the responsibility. And one of the things that inclusive leaders do is they bear in mind always that they can't pretend that they are tiny whilst leveraging all this power. I bring it up because I'm just seeing it so often with people. And there is something genuine and authentic about being an approachable leader, about being a leader with their door open. But there's nothing authentic about a leader who thinks that their presence doesn't bulk them up radically. The moment you start having some of the titles that some of you have, you're not small anymore. And there are people in your organization that will be impacted by the way you look at them, that will talk about the fact that you shook their hand. So when you have that kind of power, you just have to make sure you're mindful of it. There's a brilliant African proverb, actually, that I use in this context. And it says, we're an axe in a world of wood. And when axe meets wood, only the axe forgets. I think it's brilliant. I mean, it's very visual, but it's a brilliant example. We often do stuff. We interact with things in our life that are much more malleable and damageable than we are. The attrition shows on them, but not on us. Inclusive leaders flex. I talk about flexing a lot because there is a pervasive idea in leadership that when you start off, you do all the flexing. You operate in the way that makes your boss comfortable. You change your personality, your dress sense, all the styles that you think are you. You're willing to change all those because you're told to. But the more senior you get, the more you're allowed to be just you. So the more senior you get, the less you have to flex. And to me, this is crazy because seniority implies competence, right? When you're new at something, you are not as good. And then when you're more established and you rise up the ranks, you are better and better and better. It implies excellence at some point. Yet somehow leaders think that when you get to the top, you should be, I'm going to do it my way. Now I've got all this amazing power. I'm going to be the kind of guy, I'm going to be the Alan Sugar. I was born to be an Alan Sugar. When I was young, I liked to yell at people. And now I'm senior enough that I don't have to talk in different ways to different people. I'm going to just yell. That's what I'm going to do. And people think they don't have to flex. And I confront people with the idea that every time a senior leader flexes 0.1%, there are massive swathes of people who don't have to flex 0.1%. And if you're a leader and therefore the more competent, surely you want to be the person flexing slightly, rather than the people who are less competent beneath you and even less competent beneath them having to flex even these tiny amounts. Because if you add up the multiples, especially with large companies with large numbers of employees, but even if not, you're talking about massive numbers of people that make the difference who are now having to behave in a way that decreases their optimal performance. Flexing is important. That I talk about, one of the examples of flexing is code switching. Who is familiar with this? Code switching? Bringing massive numbers of new concepts. Great. Code switching is the idea that we speak differently to different types of people. Everyone does this. Any of you who have children, nieces, nephews, you do not speak to them the same. If they say, what do you do for a living? You don't give the same speech you give to, I don't know, one of your clients, to this kid. Code switching is not patronizing, it's not inauthentic, and it's not lying. It is simply changing the way you are delivering information to encapsulate it in a way that the person receiving it gets it with the least chance of misinterpretation, the most chance of it resonating. People often have questions about this because they think it's about patronizing your audience. They think it's about, I don't know, talking down to them or manipulating them. But it really isn't that. It's just making sure that you transmit your message with the least chance of misinterpretation and the most chance of resonating with the least chance of alienation to that particular audience. It's a form of flexing, and I think it's vital for leaders. They have to understand the people they're talking to and how they need to get that message across. But I think anybody who wants to be a successful leader, inclusive or otherwise, needs to recognize that homogeny is death. What we know from the natural world is that homogeny is death. We know from evolution that homogeny is death. We know that even the way our chromosomes recombine, the sexual reproduction that we have, is optimized to make sure that we have the maximum amount of difference in our offspring. Homogeny is death. Difference is life, most literally. There's a lot of people who have highly technically expert groups of people around them, and a challenge or a problem comes towards that group, and they all sit around the table, and one person says, I think we should do this. And 9 other people around the table all say, you know what, that's remarkable. That's exactly what I was going to say. You are brilliant. And then they go ahead with that course of action. And it's not that that is necessarily entirely wrong. It's just that it's not the complete picture, because they don't have a room of 10 people. They have a room of 1 person. And believe me when I say this is not about visual diversity or any of the things that we have cause to measure because of regulation. So it's not about gender, sexuality, race. It's not that. It's about a diversity of thought and experience. That's the thing that brings strength and resilience to any organization. The real power in diversity of thought is the idea that if there is in the center of this room a challenge or a problem here, the real power of diversity of thought is the idea that each of your people has a perspective, has a light that they can shine on this problem, illuminating it from every possible angle. So you know of every angle of this challenge or problem covered. So when the solution is defined, it is defined by knowing the whole problem in the first place. Whereas if you have a boardroom of 1 and you have 10 people stood here examining the problem, they never see the dark side of this problem. Native Americans had this experience at the very early days of us sending over boats to America, where whole groups of Native American tribes who were incredibly isolated geographically and incredibly homogeneous genetically, they would suddenly encounter, and by the way, this is before we decided to, along with the early Americans, eradicate them. So this is very benevolent visitors would come, sneeze, and entire populations would die. Please do not think this is an exaggeration. These pockets of 50 to 60 native pods, if you like, genetically homogeneous, would contract, even in those days, what were considered mild ailments, and every single one of them would die because not one of them had the gene to protect them from it. Homogeny is death. Inclusive leaders really understand that. Treating other people as you would have yourself treated, right? Semi-biblical, and that's why people don't like it when I say it's just utter nonsense, right? There is just nothing more narcissistic than sitting in an environment and saying, you know what I should do? I should treat all of you how I like to be treated. It's not how leaders operate. Because then I'm just assuming, or I'm insisting, that you have all the same likes and dislikes, motivational needs and knots as I do. And so all your buttons that require pressing are the same as my buttons are requiring pressing. And frankly, what is the chances of that in any room? Even a room that's reasonably homogeneous, what are the chances that we will all be motivated, demotivated, inspired, and not by the same things? And the weird part is, we apply the golden rule, we apply the platinum rule, if you like, this rule of treating people differently, to pets. If you've got a cat and a dog, you fully recognize that your cat is likely to be aloof and not really give a damn whether you're there or not. As long as you've provided wet food and water, it's happy and doesn't really want to be stroked or bothered. But your dog, on the other hand, will come home. When you come home, it will be there thinking, you have been away for my entire lifetime. I require 2 hours of your undivided attention. And there isn't one of you who looks at the dog and says, ah, pathetic that you require so much of my time. Look at the cat. Doesn't require my, this is a pet. You're no pet. It's amazing to me